The strengths are very much like a contact lens or a filter in front of our eyes. So we see the world through that, and we expect everybody else to see it like that.
You're listening to I Teach Overseas podcast with your host, Daniel Mendez.
Welcome to the I Teach Overseas podcast. Whether you're currently teaching overseas or considering the idea, my mission for this podcast is to celebrate, educate, and entertain our international community. Join me as we discuss current issues and trends in international schools, as well as meet some amazing people from around the world. What factors go into your decision to sign with an international school? Is it location? Maybe it's the salary. You resonated with the leaders or the school's mission or reputation. Was it a job opportunity of a lifetime, or is there something else? My guest today is Strength Strategy Coach Robert Fenlon. He'll make you question your priorities and turn a spotlight on you and your innate and acquired strengths so that you can thrive in your next international teaching adventure. Robert will also give international schools some recommendations for retaining educators and much, much more. At the end of the show, he has a special offer for all of our I Teach Overseas listeners. Before we begin the interview, here's the episode's I Teach Overseas tip. When integrating into a new country, you'll probably be asked for an email to sign up for clubs and services. Keep your host country email separate from your personal email. One way to achieve this is to create a new email address that you will use when businesses and organizations in your host country request one. Have this new email address forward to your personal email. When you move on to your new adventure, all you have to do is delete the account or stop it from being forwarded to your main personal account. I have included a tutorial on how to forward your email to another account in today's show notes, iteachoverseas.com/106. If you have an I Teach Overseas tip to share on this show, go to iteachoverseas.com or send me an email at info@iteachoverseas.com. Robert has an impressive biography that I will include in the show notes, iteachoverseas.com/106. Robert's 17 years overseas includes work in the UK, Burma, UAE, Zimbabwe, Thailand, and most recently in Northern Australia, where he won the Australian Industry Education Collaboration Award for improving employee engagement and retention. He now focuses his time on supporting international schools, teachers, and recruitment agencies as a strength strategy coach. Thank you, Robert Fenlon, for joining us today.
It's a pleasure, Dan, and I hope that there's something useful, interesting, and worthwhile for teachers around the world for you.
Well, actually, I'm very excited because the more I read about you and strengths-based coaching, I'm really excited because international schools over the last 5-6 years have been going to a coaching model. But for those of us that don't know what a coaching model is, what is a coach and why is it important?
Critically, I think for coaching, there's quite a difference between coaching, mentoring, and consulting, if you like. Coaching, and particularly the strengths coaching, you really have to start with the idea of confidentiality and non-judgment, so that you have a space where the client has the opportunity to dream, to think, to put out ideas, which would they may be reluctant to do so in some appraisal situations, in some work situations. So those key points of confidentiality and the non-judgmental ideas are important. All the ideas basically in the coaching come from the client, and I think that's critical. But so the great coach is the person who can ask the questions that go deep and ask the why. So otherwise, if you just get the idea about what they want to do without the why, you just go around and swirl, and there's a lot of confusion. I think that's probably the biggest difference of what coaching is about. And essentially, strengths is the idea of we're all good at certain things. We cannot be good at everything. We don't have enough lifetimes to do that. So we make the most impact difference in the world when we use our natural innate talents, which can be developed into strengths. And really, that's what I think can be fantastic about teaching and coaching.
So you've spent 17 years overseas and you've realized by all those transitions, the importance of not only is the transition, the location or the school important, but you're also talking about potentially the assumptions and the values and the relationships you should be considering when moving to a new country?
Yes, I mean, I think I was very blessed the first time I went to work abroad. There was a fantastic course at the Farnham Castle in Surrey near London. And many people go to that course who are going to be business leaders, teachers, etc. We actually had a fantastic week-long experience meeting returnee expats, teachers, nationals from the country, the food, the language, what to do, what not to do. And that was fantastic. We also had a session where we were asked our motivation for going. And I think that aspect is overlooked. And one of the guys looked at us in the eye and he said, more or less, if you are going abroad to escape something, you're going to find out that any insecurities you've got can be exposed much more because you don't have that normal support structure around you. That was fantastic. That course prepared us so well for living in rural Zimbabwe near the Zambezi River. And that was going back to my early days of teaching. We had no internet and letters took 3 weeks to go. But I found that, quite a few teachers that I've come across go and have perhaps take a post abroad and they just look at the externals, what language it is, what's the salary, what's the accommodation like, what's the transport like, general things about supermarkets, etc., and a little bit about cultural awareness. But essentially those deeper questions about why, what you hope to achieve, by the time you get back, if someone asked you, did you find what you were looking for? Did you give what you're looking for? Sometimes that question's overlooked because we don't always know what is it we're looking for. And that question is critical, I think, for success abroad.
Very important because my wife and I have made that decision many times. And, what is the motivation for going to some of the countries that we have been? What are some questions that we could be asking ourselves?
Well, the main thing is, to recognize what skills you've got. How do they match up with a particular school? Because many countries, many schools are very different. The opportunity you've got to teach, some are very prescriptive. They tell you more or less what you have to do. Some of the cultures, some of the countries that you're living in, you have to be very, very careful about what you say, your lifestyle. Even the topics you raise in the classroom can be very politically, culturally sensitive. So I think those are some practicalities. One of the key points is to say, what's your contribution? As we all know from sort of Maslow, what we all need a sense of contribution to what we're doing. It's not just about the money. Well, it can be, but for most of us, that won't last. The motivation won't last for that, and the effectiveness won't. So, what contribution can we make? And also that feeling of actually being part of something, being part of something bigger than ourselves. Are we making a difference to the students? So how do we interact? What do we hope to do? How much time we've got apart from teaching? How much time are we prepared to contribute, and what opportunities there are? Some teachers live off-site or on a compound where it's very difficult to interact with local students, teachers, community. So I think all those sorts of things are important to look at. What difference are you hoping to make in that particular country? What do you hope to learn? What are your success criteria by the time you come back? And how do you feel that you've grown as a person? And how is that providing you, if you like, with a stepping stone to where you may like to go in the future? It's like the idea of, if you go into a restaurant and you just say, look, I like some food. We could get anything. So when we go abroad, to a particular school, it's not just teaching, but what experience culturally, educationally, professionally, socially, spiritually, whatever, what do we actually hope to achieve by that time abroad? And how do we measure that as well? And I think that's part of the coaching to help clarify what we're actually about so that our contribution, we take those opportunities. When we're clear about what we're actually looking for and being open to that with our strengths, then we're more likely to have a successful time rather than frustrating time, counting the days to the contract end.
Are you hosting an event? Would you like me to share that with iTeach Overseas listeners? Send me an email at info@iteachoverseas.com. how would we go about working with you?
Well, I think the first thing with strengths coaching, remember that the strengths coaching is based on the findings of Don Clifton and many 40 years of research into what actually makes people thrive. The idea really is there's an assessment called the Clifton Strengths Finder, which all our clients would take. It takes 45 minutes online assessment, and it's incredibly, I find, perceptive, and it so identifies your strengths. And then once those are identified, we look at how each of those strengths, just like a tree, every tree has got certain needs, like types of water, sunshine, soil, acidity, etc. But it also has a certain contribution, i.e., the fruit, etc., what it gives. So our strengths our strengths have certain contributions and needs. And if we don't acknowledge that, then we'll feel real frustration. So, for instance, once we do that assessment, I would work through what the contribution needs are. We start to establish what are the goals. Usually we have about 2 or 3 clearly defined goals, what we're trying to do. So we start with the why, then we go to the what, and then we look at the how. So we look at the situation, we find what actually makes a client really feel alive, and we find that when people are using their gifts, that's when they feel most energized, and therefore they give the most contribution. Normally, I have about 6 sessions with a client. It can be before they go abroad, then during the assignment. So it's like stepping stones. And then critically, I think, return. If someone is going back to their home country or moving on after 2, 3, or 4 years or whatever abroad, where they want to go using that experience and the gifts that they've actually used in that time. So returning home, that reverse culture shock, if you like, is something which I'm sure you know is often overlooked. So that would be part of our coaching as well. So someone may have returned home and the normality really gets to them. They think, some people thrive on change, thrive on different opportunities, meeting new cultures, etc. And it can become quite mundane, going back to the old life. Something has changed in us. How do we handle that? Where do we move on from that? How do we contribute back to, if you like, our home country? What sort of role are we looking for? And where do we go in terms of our career after that?
Is that Clifton Strengths Finder skill test, is that something you pay for, or is that something that you just do?
Right. Well, the Clifton Strengths Finder, about 20 million people have taken the Strengths Finder assessment. It's something which is a standard fee of about $90 to take the 34, according to the research, 34 different strengths. And we operate normally from our top 8 to 10 on a daily basis. And the ones that are what we call not necessarily our weaknesses, but our lesser strengths are the ones that are often our blind spots. So this is why it's great culturally when you meet people from different countries. The assessment can be taken in about 20 different languages. It takes 45 minutes online, as I say, and you get results back almost immediately. And it's a language basically that bridges different cultures. So sometimes people wonder why are they acting like that? Why is their behavior? Why are they thinking like that? It's because the strengths are very much like a contact lens or a filter in front of our eyes. So we see the world through that, and we expect everybody else to see it like that. So for instance, my top one is connectedness. I see a purpose in that. I've got very strong empathy, strategic. I can see a way out of a situation or a way forward through everything. And includer. Those are my top 4. And achiever. Sorry, my top 5 there. So that's why it takes me half an hour to get out from the restaurant. I wanted to talk to everybody. If I see someone sit by themselves, and then other people who are also very kind would just go straight out and they get on with their task because they're more task orientated. Mine are very much relationship based. Once you know where someone's coming from, then it just helps to overcome sort of suspicion and sort of frustration, and then you can compensate for that. So the best teams have a mixture of those strengths, so task and relationship.
That's my next question. How can schools and administration benefit from this experience? Do you have any more insight into that?
Yes, sure. You have maybe 5 or 6 people working in a team, and then rather than just saying, well, who'd like to do this, who'd like to do that, you often find there's a correlation between someone's strengths and the tasks which they like to do. they don't see it so much as a task. For instance, every time when I was the head of department in England, every time there was a liaison role between different schools, sharing projects, etc., getting in touch with certain people, my hand was up straight away because they just correlated with my strengths. Whereas if it was like number crunching or filling in forms, which is analytical in a way, that's my number 34. And I was wondering why I felt so drained, and I sort of would hate doing that. I'd really just feel absolutely exhausted after 10 minutes, whereas other people thrive on it. So if you have a team of people like SMT, using the Clifton Strengths Finder, when you get the feedback, you put those top 5, for instance, because that's the best way to operate initially. Put those top 5 on the wall or in front of someone, and then you see that's what they're best at. That's what they normally operate from. That's how they see the world. So whether it's connectedness, whether it's analytical, whether it's command or self-assurance, whatever it might be, you could say, that's why they're operating it from. For instance, I have a client who is his top strengths are very much strategic. He's brilliant at planning and developing staff, but he doesn't have the command or self-assurance. So the role of being an upfront man, like a head teacher, he feels uncomfortable with that. But he's a brilliant developer of people. So once you can see, well, that's why people operate like that. That's why people feel energized, gravitate towards those tasks. So it can be fantastic at helping to delegate and assign tasks that are life-giving, energizing, and for the team and for the individual. As I say, building up that team, building up relationships, when it's a constantly changing revolving door, as it is in some schools, to actually make real progress, you do need to build on stability and on people's strengths.
You also mentioned in our briefing there's some essentials for planning time abroad. Is there any other things that you help with going overseas?
Well, the main thing that I would suggest really is that there are certain questions. As I say, a coach doesn't provide the answers, but a key part of the coaching is asking the right questions. A lot of the time abroad, I've learned the hard way.
We all have.
17 years, as you know, yeah. You go into a situation and you think, well, is it best to ask somebody? Is it best to just keep your mouth shut, etc.? So those blind spots, sometimes we go into a situation. So in my coaching, what I'd often do is ask a question that helps the person to discover something for themselves. So if they got blind spots, I look at what their blind spots are likely to be with their strengths, and then it's a lot easier for them to come up with a solution because they know how they operate. They know the context in which they'll be working better than I do. But because I've learned the hard way, I think that I've got a grip on some of those sort of critical questions that will be the difference between surviving and thriving abroad. I've seen quite a number of staff who have only stayed, perhaps a term. They just can't cope with it. Once the holiday, what do they call it? The honeymoon period, when the novelty wears off a bit.
The reality sets in that they've now moved into a country or a situation that it becomes a little bit more clear. Yes, absolutely.
Another perhaps of advice that I'd give is, when I mentioned earlier about the idea of when we're working abroad, we are interested in seeing countries, but sometimes there's something to be said for staying put in a country, becoming involved with some sort of a local school, charity, whatever it might be, some sort of way to get an insight into the culture. So it's like having that deeper root. So you're not just in the school and getting out as quick as you can. I know teaching can be tiring, exhausting, but there are many sort of, if you like, jewels and diamonds to be found, metaphorically in that particular country, and opportunities for us to develop other skills, other ways to contribute besides just in a teaching perspective.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Is there anything that we haven't touched on, we kind of missed maybe?
Well, we know very much that teaching is about relationships. And as I say, one of the reasons why I'm in this coaching space now is that I believe that quite a few teachers would actually benefit from staying. As you know, most contracts are like 2 years abroad. There's a huge impact that third year can make. Head teachers have said that to me. Students have said that to me. School development plans will be much stronger with more continuity. So rather than waiting for an exit interview, I feel that schools in particular can be a bit more proactive about this and say, what can we do? What can we do to help that person to stay on? And not just financially. We know that there's much more in terms of contribution or in terms of applying their strengths, because that's where they feel energized. That's where we come alive. That's why we enjoy it. That's why people work often involuntary work for nothing. I would say that's key, because I've seen people's faces when the teacher's not shown up, when there's substitute teachers coming in and out in certain schools. And particularly when you are from a different culture, students might take quite a while to get used to the accent, get used to your way of thinking.
You're absolutely right. I think that the schools that have the best reputations tend to have people that have stayed a long time to develop programs and
Yes.
to develop the curriculum, and those relationships take a long time to form and they can erode very quickly. You actually have a offer for our I Teach Overseas listeners. Do you want to share that now?
I feel very blessed that I've had this time abroad. I really, really think it's a fantastic opportunity for not everybody, but most people to take at least a 2-year opportunity, if it's possible, to work abroad. I feel that it helps to overcome so many misunderstandings in the world. And so as part of that, if someone has an opportunity to go abroad, but they're sort of reluctant, not sure whether to go or not, I'd be very happy to, even if it was just a half an hour consultation, if they get their top 5 strengths, which you can get down for $20, then I'm happy to run through that and then give them sort of a sense of how I might be able to help them. And if they have 2 or 3 questions to ask, how their strengths may actually help them to really thrive abroad, to get in touch with the why and the how, then I'll be very happy to do that.
So how could a teacher or a school get a hold of you? Where can we find you?
Probably the best way is through my LinkedIn profile and Robert at strengthscoachinginternational.com.
Well, thank you very, very much, Robert. And you've reinforced some of the reasons why I've stayed overseas. And you've made me also question why I am still overseas. I really appreciate that. And thank you very much for being on the I Teach Overseas podcast.
It's a pleasure, Dan. Thank you very much. I hope there's something worthwhile for everybody.